Welcome to part 5 of Addiction 101 for Family Members. I'm Tom Harrison, author of The Complete Family Guide to Addiction. In our last segment, we talked about the typical characteristic behaviors of people with an addiction. Today, we're going to talk about the characteristic experiences and behaviors of their family, what the family goes through as a result of the disease. I think the most important thing to recognize is that addiction is a family disease. When an addict gets sick, it's not just the addict who gets sick. The entire family gets sick and becomes debilitated. And just as an addict doesn't get well overnight, has to go through a process of recovery, typically the family will not get well overnight as well. They have to go through their own process of recovery. So let's talk a little bit about what they experience. In the early stages of the disease, often what families experience is confusion, uncertainty, and self-doubt. They know something's wrong, but they may not immediately know exactly what it is. Remember, addicts are very, very good at covering things up. They're often in denial. They often are very good at saying, I don't have a problem, or it's not an addiction. So families often feel like something's wrong, but they can't necessarily say that's what it is. And so they go through this process. Often they're gaslighted by the addict, and they go through this process of uncertainty before they finally realize, okay, it's an addiction. And even then, many families go through denial. We mentioned in our last segment that addicts are typically in denial. Many family members are in denial too. Remember, denial is the way that the brain puts off having to process something that's very traumatic and difficult. And the fact that a family member has this terrible disease of addiction is traumatic and difficult. Many family members just refuse to be aware of it. And what you see in a lot of families is one or more family members are in denial about the addict, and one or more family members are not. And often they end up fighting with each other, which is extremely difficult and counterproductive. Addiction causes most family members a tremendous amount of stress. The addict is withdrawn. The addict is not playing their part in their family. The addict is causing fights. The family members often walk on eggshells to try to avoid conflict, or they get into conflict. But either way, their life becomes extremely stressful, and they have to work around all of the changes that are going on in the addict's behavior that they may not even understand. That's extremely stressful. Another thing addicts experience, or addicts' families experience, is anger. They're often very, very mad and frustrated by the addict's behavior, particularly if they don't fully understand it or they believe it's the addict's fault. This is especially true of spouses, because for spouses, an addiction can feel like a betrayal. It can feel like an infidelity. It can feel like the addict has gone off with someone else, except it's not a person, it's a substance. But the experience can be the same. Families often experience a tremendous amount of emotional hurt. They feel like they've been abandoned. They feel like they've been mistreated, and they don't know why exactly. They don't understand what's caused this, and they feel hurt. How could you do this to me? They want to know. Families often experience mistrust. And for good reason. They can't trust the addict because the addict is not behaving in a way that's trustworthy. But it's very difficult for a family member to mistrust someone that they love and they care about. Families often feel guilt. They feel like it's their fault. It's not. But often the only way to make sense of what's happening is to think, oh, maybe I'm responsible, because it's easier to say I'm responsible than to say I don't know what's responsible. This is especially true of parents of an addict. Parents of an addict often feel like there must have been something I could have done differently so this wouldn't have happened. That's not true, but they very, very, very often feel tremendously guilty. A lot of families experience isolation. They withdraw from the community. They withdraw from their friends. They withdraw from other people because they have a family secret. the addiction becomes the family secret, and they don't want other people to know about it, and they don't know how to talk about it. And so rather than put themselves in situations where they might be found out, they withdraw from other people, which only makes their whole situation worse and increases the amount of stress and increases the amount of difficulty that they experience. A lot of family members feel inadequate. They feel like, I should be able to fix this because I am the person in the family who fixes things or who comforts people, and I can't do that. And that makes them feel very inadequate and like their role in the family has been diminished. And finally, what a lot of family members experience is grief. Now, you think of grief as something you experience after a death, right, or when you lose someone. But in fact, when an addict becomes an addict, you kind of lose them. They cease being the person they were. They cease having the relationship they used to have with you. And so many people experience a kind of grief without a complete loss. They grieve the relationship they had with the person. So if you think about all these things together, you have self-doubt, you have stress, anger, hurt, mistrust, guilt, isolation, inadequacy, grief. It's a toxic stew of dysfunction. Families just collapse under the weight of this desperate inability to cope with this horrible thing that's happening to them. And there's no obvious way to make it better. There's no obvious manual that says, here's how you fix this problem. It seems insoluble. It seems like there's nothing you can do. So in our next segment, we're going to talk about what you can do, how family members can make things better, how they can start the process of getting their loved one into treatment and into recovery. That's really important, so I hope you will join me for that. Thank you.